The German army of 1918 was the most sophisticated fighting force the world had ever seen, with elite stormtroopers who could punch through any defense. And yet, in just 100 days, it completely fell apart, not just defeated, but utterly broken, with nearly 500,000 soldiers simply refusing to fight anymore. So, if these stories work for you, hit subscribe. Actually curious, are you using this to fall asleep, or are you one of those people listening while doing something completely unexpected? Let me know in the comments. So, 1918. Before we get into it though, get comfortable. I mean it. Fix those pillows, pull up that blanket. Because we're about to spend the next couple hours in the trenches, and you might as well be cozy while the world falls apart around us. You're waking up in a drafty office at German military headquarters, February 1918. The first thing you notice is the chill. Unlike your warm bed right now, this wooden chair you've fallen asleep on has left your back aching and your fingers numb. Papers are scattered everywhere, maps with coloured pencil marks, casualty reports, supply requisitions. The single light bulb flickers above as wind whistles through poorly sealed windows. Lieutenant Müller, wake up for God's sake. You jolt upright, nearly knocking over the cold cup of ersatz coffee on your desk. It's not real coffee. There hasn't been real coffee in Germany for years thanks to the British naval blockade. Just some horrible mixture of roasted acorns and chicory that tastes like dirt. Captain Weber is standing over you, his gaunt face evidence of the same food shortages affecting everyone in Germany. The general needs those troop movement calculations now. The general, Erich Ludendorff, the most powerful man in Germany, even though technically he's just the quartermaster general, the chief of staff to Field Marshal Hindenburg, but everyone knows who's really running the war. Coming, sir, you grab the papers, trying to organize them as you stand. Your stomach growls loudly. When was the last time you ate something substantial? You can't remember. Here, take this. The captain tosses you a small chunk of black bread. Saved it from last night. You look like death. You mumble thanks and stuff it in your pocket for later. Food is too precious to eat immediately. The hallway outside is bustling with activity, despite the early hour. Officers rushing about, messengers delivering telegrams, the constant clicking of typewriters. The German war machine never stops, especially now. See, here's the thing about early 1918 that most people don't understand. Germany was actually winning the war, or at least they'd just knocked one of their biggest enemies out of the fight. Russia had collapsed into revolution, and the new Bolshevik government had signed a humiliating peace treaty. Suddenly, Germany had one less front to worry about. Wait, let me paint you a picture. Imagine you're fighting two guys at once, getting your ass kicked for years, and suddenly one of them taps out. You'd be feeling pretty good, right? That's Germany in early 1918, as you push open the heavy oak doors to the main strategy room. You're hit with a wall of cigarette smoke so thick you can barely see. Through the haze, clustered around a massive table covered with maps, are the men planning Germany's last desperate gamble. Ah, Lieutenant, finally, the troop calculations? Ludendorff doesn't look up from the map as he extends his hand. He's a bull of a man, stocky, powerful, with a completely bald head and a walrus moustache. At 53, he's been effectively running the German war effort for the last 2 years. He sleeps maybe 4 hours a night and works the rest. You've heard the whispers among the staff. Ludendorff hasn't been the same lately. The strain is getting to him. He's more irritable, more prone to sudden changes of mind, more dismissive of anyone who disagrees with him. Some say he's working himself to death. 19-20 hours a day, 7 days a week. You hand over the papers and he immediately begins scanning the numbers. Good, he mutters. With the divisions transferred from the Eastern Front, we'll have numerical superiority over the British for the first time. The room falls silent as Ludendorff begins moving wooden blocks across the map. each block representing thousands of men who will live or die based on where his hand places them. "Gentlemen," he says, "Operation Michael will be the largest offensive in human history. We will break the British lines, drive to the sea, and end this war before the Americans can arrive in force." One of the older officers clears his throat. "Sir, what about our food situation? The men are already on reduced rations." Ludendorff waves his hand dismissively. "Once we break through, we'll capture British supply dumps. The men can eat English food." You glance at Captain Weber, who gives you a small, worried shrug. The food situation isn't just bad, it's catastrophic. The British naval blockade has been slowly strangling Germany for years. Last winter was called the turnip winter because that's all most Germans had to eat. This winter has been even worse. Just yesterday, you saw women and children digging through garbage behind the officers' mess. Your own mother's letters from Berlin describe people collapsing in the streets from hunger. The official ration is 1,000 calories per day, less than half what a person needs, and most people can't even get that. Ludendorff continues outlining the offensive. "Our new stormtroopers will punch holes in their line, bypassing strong points. Follow-up troops will widen the gaps. We'll be in their rear areas before they know what's happening." The stormtroopers, Germany's elite shock troops trained in the new infiltration tactics. Unlike the mass attacks of earlier years, these men move in small, nimble groups, finding the weak points, using flamethrowers and light machine guns to create chaos. On paper, it's brilliant. "And the Americans?" asks another officer. "They won't be a factor," Ludendorff says firmly. "Their first divisions won't reach France until late spring, and they're green, untrained. This offensive will succeed long before they can matter. But you've seen the intelligence reports. The Americans are already arriving, 300,000 by March, with millions more to follow. The clock is ticking for Germany." As Ludendorff continues his briefing, you find yourself studying his face. This is the man whose decisions will determine whether Germany wins or loses, whether millions of your countrymen live or die. And he looks exhausted, beyond exhausted. There are dark circles under his eyes, a slight tremor in his hands. The meeting drags on for hours. Artillery calculations, ammunition allocations, hospital preparations. The scale is mind-boggling. 6,000 artillery pieces, 3,500 mortars, millions of shells, all to be fired in a 5-hour bombardment before the infantry attack. You take notes mechanically, but your mind keeps drifting to what's not being discussed. The morale problems in units transferred from the east, where soldiers had tasted peace only to be thrown into a new offensive. The breakdown of the railway system that's supposed to supply this massive attack. The growing unrest at home. Someone mentions the new Spanish flu that's beginning to spread among the troops, but it's dismissed as a minor concern. There are bigger problems. By the time you're dismissed, night has fallen again. You stumble back to your office, legs stiff from standing all day. The piece of bread the captain gave you is still in your pocket, and you eat it slowly, savouring each stale bite. Through your window, you can see trains arriving at the station below, carrying division after division from the Eastern Front. Men who thought they were going home now headed for the Western Front, the meat grinder that has already killed millions. You should sleep, but instead you find yourself drawing a small map on a scrap of paper, the grand offensive Ludendorff has planned, with arrows showing the German advance. It looks impressive on paper, overwhelming force, innovative tactics, the element of surprise. But as you stare at your sketch, a chill runs down your spine that has nothing to do with the cold room. For this plan to work, everything has to go perfectly. The weather, the supply lines, the enemy reaction, the morale of the troops, and in war, nothing ever goes perfectly. You crumple the paper and toss it into the small stove in the corner, watching as it catches fire and turns to ash. Better not to have unauthorized plans lying around. Besides, what do you know? You're just a lieutenant. Ludendorff is a military genius who's won tremendous victories in the East. If anyone can pull this off, it's him. Germany's fate rests in his hands, and as the weeks pass, the preparations accelerate. Thousands of artillery pieces are moved into position under cover of night to hide them from Allied aircraft. The new stormtroopers train relentlessly in the tactics that will supposedly break the stalemate of trench warfare. Millions of shells are stockpiled for the greatest bombardment in history. Through it all, Ludendorff drives himself and everyone around him with maniacal intensity. The man barely sleeps, surviving on cigarettes and nervous energy. Some officers whisper that he's having breakdowns behind closed doors, but in public he's the embodiment of German determination. One evening in early March, as you're updating mobilization charts, Captain Weber drops into the chair opposite your desk. He looks around to make sure you're alone, then leans forward. You know why Ludendorff is pushing so hard for this offensive? He asks quietly. You shrug. To win the war before the Americans arrive in force. Weber gives a bitter laugh. That's the official reason. The real reason, Germany is starving to death. The civilian rations have been cut again. There were riots in Berlin last week. Did you hear about that? Police fired into the crowd, killed 20 people. It's being kept quiet. You hadn't heard. The newspapers don't report such things anymore. This offensive isn't just about winning, Weber continues, his voice barely above a whisper. It's our only option. Either we break through and capture the channel ports, or Germany collapses from within. Ludendorff knows this. The enormity of what he's saying sinks in. This isn't just a military operation, it's a desperate gamble to save Germany itself. What do you think our chances are, you ask? Weber rubs his tired eyes. Honestly, I don't know. The plan is sound, at least on paper, but the men, they're so hungry and tired. 4 years of war. How much more can they give? Before you can respond, there's a commotion in the hallway. The door bursts open and there stands Ludendorff himself. Captain Lieutenant, what are you still doing here? The final orders need to be distributed to the divisional commanders. Now. You both jump to your feet, saluting. Ludendorff looks even more haggard than the last time you saw him up close, but there's a feverish energy in his eyes. Yes, sir, Weber says. Right away, sir. Ludendorff nods and turns to leave, then pauses. 1 week, he says almost to himself. In 1 week we change the course of history. And with that, he's gone, his heavy footsteps echoing down the hallway. Weber gives you a meaningful look. Well, there you have it. 1 week until Operation Michael begins. 1 week until the greatest gamble in military history. 1 week until Germany throws everything it has into one final desperate offensive to win the war. As you gather the orders for distribution, you can't help but wonder, will it be enough? Or is Germany, for all its military might and tactical innovation, already doomed? The answer would come soon enough, in the fog-shrouded dawn of March 21st, 1918. Your candle has burned low, the shadows growing long across the wooden desk where you've been working. Outside, the first signs of spring are appearing, but there's still a chill in the air that cuts through your uniform. Despite the late hour, German headquarters remains abuzz with activity. Tomorrow, Operation Michael begins. The maps are finalised, the orders distributed. There's nothing left to do but wait and try to ignore the gnawing hunger that has become your constant companion. You think of your family back in Berlin, wonder if they're getting even the meagre rations they're promised. Your mother's last letter mentioned that your younger sister had fainted at school. just tired," she'd written, "but you know better. Germany is starving, slowly but surely." The greatest army in the world, with the most advanced tactics and technology, is running on empty stomachs and desperate hopes, and tomorrow that army will launch the offensive that will determine whether all the sacrifice has been for nothing. Your eyes grow heavy as you stare at the candle's flickering flame, wondering what dawn will bring. Unlike your comfortable bed back home where you're listening to this story, there will be no real rest tonight for the soldiers of Germany poised on the edge of history's knife. And as you drift off, the last thing you see is the official order stamped with the Imperial Eagle. Operation Michael commences at 0440 hours. The early morning darkness of March 21st, 1918 was unlike anything the Western Front had seen before. 4,000 German artillery pieces were about to unleash hell on a scale that would make the earth itself tremble, and for the soldiers huddled in forward positions, waiting to attack. The strangest part wasn't the impending barrage. It was the silence before it started. Let me transport you there. You're no longer a staff officer at headquarters. You're now Otto Schroeder, a 22-year-old corporal in one of Germany's elite stormtrooper units. Unlike your warm bed right now, you're crouching in a muddy trench just 200 meters from the British front line, shivering in the pre-dawn gloom. The fog is so thick you can barely see the man beside you, which is good. It will help conceal your advance, but it also means you keep imagining shapes moving in the mist, British patrols that might discover the massive attack about to begin. Your stomach growls painfully. Dinner last night was a thin potato soup and a chunk of black bread so hard you needed to soak it in the soup to avoid breaking your teeth. The bread sits like a rock in your gut now. 4 years of blockade have left even the elite storm units on starvation rations. 2 minutes, whispers Sergeant Muller beside you. He checks his watch again, the luminous dial glowing faintly. Almost time. Your hands tighten around your MP-18 submachine gun, a new weapon for this new kind of warfare. The standard German infantry still use bolt-action rifles, but stormtroopers get the best equipment. The gun is heavier than it looks, especially with the snail drum magazine containing 32 rounds. God! "I'd kill for a cigarette," mutters Franz, a barrel-chested Bavarian on your left. "Just one drag." "Shut up," hisses the sergeant. 30 seconds. Everyone falls silent. Across miles of front, hundreds of thousands of German soldiers are checking watches, adjusting equipment, saying silent prayers. This is it. The Kaiser's battle, they're calling it. Germany's last best hope to win the war. You close your eyes for a moment, thinking of home, of your mother in Berlin lining up for rations at 4 in the morning, of your father who lost his arm at Verdun 2 years ago and now stares silently out the window most days, of your younger brother who's probably going to be called up soon if this offensive fails. 10 seconds, the sergeant whispers. Your mouth goes dry. The silence is absolute. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The world explodes. The sound is beyond anything human ears were meant to hear. Not just loud, but physical. A wall of noise that slams into your body. The ground bucks beneath you like a living thing. Thousands of artillery pieces firing simultaneously. The shells screaming overhead. "Jesus Christ!" someone shouts, though you can barely hear it over the barrage. Through gaps in the fog, you see the flashes lighting up the horizon from end to end. It's like the apocalypse itself has come to the Western Front. The British lines, just 200 metres away, have disappeared in explosions of mud, wood, and bodies. This isn't like the days-long preliminary bombardments of earlier offensives, which gave the enemy plenty of time to bring up reserves. This is the new German doctrine, a short, incredibly intense hurricane bombardment focused on neutralizing command posts, communications, and artillery batteries. 5 hours of this hell, and then you attack. The time passes in a daze of noise and concussion. No one can sleep through this kind of barrage, but you find yourself drifting in and out of awareness, the constant noise becoming almost hypnotic. At one point, Franz offers you a piece of sausage he's been hoarding. It's no bigger than your thumb, but it's real meat, a rarity these days. You divide it into 3 even smaller pieces and share it with the sergeant. The salt and fat taste like heaven after months of near starvation. My cousin works in a butcher shop in Munich, Franz explains, having to shout over the continuing barrage. Saves scraps for me when he can. Your cousin is a goddamn hero, the sergeant says with complete sincerity, licking his fingers clean. Another hour passes, the barrage shifts targets, now focusing more on the British front lines. That means the infantry assault is getting close. Check your gear, the sergeant orders. We move in 30 minutes. You go through the ritual, ammunition pouches secure, stick grenades arranged for easy access, gas mask tested and ready, trench knife sharp. The steel helmet feels heavy on your head, but you'd rather have the weight than go without it. Remember the plan, the sergeant says, gathering your squad around him. We don't stop to fight strong points, we find the gaps and push through. Keep moving, keep pushing west. The regular infantry will deal with the pockets we bypass. That's the essence of the new stormtrooper tactics. Don't waste time and lives trying to capture every machine gun nest or fortress. Find the weak points, infiltrate, get into the enemy's rear areas and cause chaos. What if we get too far ahead of the main force? Asks a newer recruit, a farm boy from East Prussia who looks about 17. The sergeant gives him a grim smile. Then we die gloriously for the fatherland, kid, but not before taking a lot of Tommies with us. No one laughs. You've all seen too much death for that kind of gallows humour to land anymore. 5 minutes. The call comes down the line. You take a deep breath, trying to calm your racing heart. The artillery has shifted again, now placing a wall of fire just ahead of where you'll be advancing. A creeping barrage, they call it, designed to move forward at the same pace as the infantry, keeping the enemy's heads down until the last possible moment. Gas masks on, orders the sergeant. The British might respond with gas shells, and there's also the risk of stumbling into pockets of gas left over from previous bombardments. The mask is claustrophobic, the eyepiece is already starting to fog up. Breathing becomes a conscious effort, each inhale a raspy pull through the filter. 1 minute. You check your watch, synchronizing with the sergeant. The seconds tick by with agonizing slowness, and then the whistle blows. Forward, roars the sergeant, and suddenly you're up and over the top, running into the fog and smoke, dozens of dark shapes moving around you. The noise of the barrage is still deafening, but now there's a new sound beneath it. The chattering of machine guns, the crack of rifles, men shouting orders and screaming in pain. The fog is a blessing and a curse. It hides you from enemy fire, but makes it easy to lose your bearings. You follow the shapes ahead, trusting they know where they're going. The first British trench appears suddenly out of the mist, a jagged scar in the earth. There are bodies slumped over the parapet, torn apart by the artillery, but some defenders are still alive, firing desperately at the advancing Germans. You don't stop to fight. That's not your job. You spot a section where the trench has been almost filled in by a direct hit, creating a natural ramp. You sprint for it, leaping over the shallow ditch and continuing west, deeper into British territory. Behind you, regular German infantry will clear the trench. Your job is to keep moving, keep advancing. The ground is a nightmare of shell holes and torn wire. Twice you stumble and nearly fall. The fog is starting to lift as the sun rises, but there's so much smoke from the bombardment that visibility remains poor. You catch glimpses of the carnage around you, a British machine gun nest obliterated by a direct hit, the gunner still sitting upright but missing his head, a German flamethrower team advancing on a dugout, the terrible jet of burning fuel making short work of the defenders. A wounded horse from an artillery team, somehow still alive, trying to rise on shattered legs. "Keep moving," the sergeant shouts, and you push on. The British seem stunned by the ferocity of the attack. Their resistance is scattered, uncoordinated. You pass through their second line of trenches with minimal opposition, then their third. By mid-morning, your squad has advanced nearly 3 miles, an unheard of distance after years of stalemate where gains were measured in yards. "Holy hell, we're actually doing it," Franz says during a brief pause to regroup. "We're breaking through." The sergeant nods, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. "Don't get cocky, the hard part comes now. We're beyond their prepared defences, but they'll be bringing up reserves." You gulp water from your canteen, suddenly aware of how thirsty you are. The constant running, the weight of your equipment, the stress of combat, it all takes a tremendous physical toll. And you're hungry again, that gnawing emptiness that never really goes away these days. You reach into your pocket and find a crumb of bread left over from last night, pop it into your mouth. It does nothing to satisfy the hunger. "Look," Franz points west, where the fog is finally starting to clear. "Is that a town?" The sergeant pulls out his field glasses. "Supply depot," he says after a moment, excitement creeping into his voice. "British supply depot, and it doesn't look like they've started evacuating yet." Your squad exchanges glances. A supply depot means food, real food, not the garbage you've been subsisting on. "Let's go," the sergeant says, and no one needs to be told twice. You advance more cautiously now, using shell holes and patches of woodland for cover. The British resistance is stiffening as they recover from the initial shock, but they're still disorganised, still reeling. The supply depot turns out to be a small French village that's been turned into a logistics hub. There are warehouses, motor pools, field kitchens, and as you reach the eastern edge of the village, you realise the British are in the middle of breakfast. The scene is almost comical. Dozens of support troops and rear echelon units sitting at long tables in an outdoor mess area, forks halfway to their mouths as they stare in shock at the German stormtroopers emerging from the morning mist. "Hände hoch!" roars the sergeant, and you all level your weapons. There's a moment of frozen indecision, and then the British drop their utensils and raise their hands. They're not frontline combat troops, and they know it. "Franz, Heinrich, secure the prisoners," the sergeant orders. "The rest of you, fan out. Secure the area, and for God's sake, don't shoot the cooks." That gets a laugh, nervous, but genuine. The smell from the field kitchens is intoxicating. Bacon, eggs, real coffee. Your stomach clenches painfully. The next hour is a blur of activity. More German units arrive, including regular infantry to handle the prisoners. Your squad is tasked with taking inventory of the captured supplies, while engineers prepare to either transport or destroy anything you can't take with you. "Look at this," Franz says, opening a warehouse door. Inside are stacks of crates, tinned beef, jam, biscuits, chocolate. More food than you've seen in one place since before the war. Christ, no wonder they're fighting so hard, the sergeant mutters. They're living like kings while we starve. You're given 10 minutes to eat. Real food, hot food, more calories in one meal than you'd normally get in 2 days. The British cooks, now prisoners, watch with a mixture of amusement and pity as the feared German stormtroopers stuff themselves like starving wolves. Slow down, the sergeant warns. You'll make yourself sick. But no one listens. When you've been hungry for years, self-control around food becomes impossible. And he's right. Within minutes, some of the men are doubled over, vomiting up what they've just eaten. Their shrunken stomachs can't handle the sudden richness. You manage to keep your meal down, but only barely. The coffee, real coffee with sugar and condensed milk, hits your system like a drug. You feel almost dizzy with the rush of caffeine and calories. 5 minutes, calls an officer you don't recognize. Get ready to move out. You stuff your pockets with chocolate and biscuits, fill your canteen with coffee instead of water. All around, other soldiers are doing the same, preparing for the advance to continue. The sergeant gathers your squad. New orders, he says, pointing at a map. We keep pushing west. Command thinks the British are on the verge of breaking completely. If we can reach this road junction by nightfall, we might split their army in two. The excitement is palpable. After years of stalemate, you're advancing faster than anyone thought possible. The great German offensive is working. Maybe, just maybe, you'll win this war after all. But as you move out, you notice the first signs of trouble. The field telephone lines haven't kept up with the advance. Communication with headquarters is spotty at best. The roads are choked with troops and supply wagons, creating massive traffic jams. And most concerning of all, the British artillery has started to find its range again, dropping shells on the newly won territory. Keep moving, the sergeant urges as a shell lands uncomfortably close. The farther we push them, the safer we'll be. By late afternoon, your squad has advanced another 2 miles, but the pace has slowed dramatically. The British have recovered from their initial shock and are putting up fiercer resistance. Their machine guns are expertly sighted, covering open ground with interlocking fields of fire. And you're tired, bone tired. The adrenaline of the morning has worn off, leaving you shaky and exhausted. The breakfast feast feels like a distant memory, your stomach growling again as your body burns through the sudden influx of calories. We need to take that farmhouse, the sergeant says, pointing to a stone building on a small rise. British soldiers have turned it into a makeshift strongpoint, and they're holding up the entire advance in this sector. Your squad moves forward in rushes, 2 men providing covering fire while the others advance. It's textbook stormtrooper tactics, and it works. You get within grenade range with only 1 casualty, the young East Prussian who takes a bullet through the shoulder. "Now!" shouts the sergeant. And you all pull the pins on your stick grenades, lobbing them through the windows of the farmhouse. The explosions are deafening in the enclosed space. When you storm in, weapons ready, you find only bodies. "Clear," calls Franz from the upper floor. "We've got observation from up here. Looks like their next line is about half a mile west." The sergeant checks his map, then pulls out his field glasses to scan the terrain. "Good work," he says. "We'll hold here for now. Wait for the regular infantry to catch up. I don't want to get too far ahead of the main force." You collapse onto a bench, suddenly aware of how heavily you're breathing. Your muscles ache, your feet are raw with blisters, and despite the stunning success of the day, you feel a nagging sense of doubt. "We're going too fast," says Heinrich, the squad's machine gunner, giving voice to what you're all thinking. "Supply lines can't keep up." The sergeant doesn't disagree. "High command knows what they're doing," he says, but he doesn't sound convinced. Through the farmhouse window, you watch the sun beginning to set over the churned-up battlefield. In a single day, the German army has advanced further than in the previous 3 years combined. Thousands of British soldiers have been killed or captured, along with enormous quantities of supplies and equipment. By any measure, it's a stunning victory. So why does it feel like you're balanced on a knife's edge? Maybe it's the fact that despite the breakthrough, the British army hasn't collapsed. They're falling back, yes, but in relatively good order. They're trading space for time, exactly what the German plan can't afford. Or maybe it's the logistical problems you've witnessed firsthand. The clogged roads, the broken down vehicles, the communications breakdowns. The German advance is already outrunning its supply lines, and it's only day 1. Get some rest, the sergeant advises, breaking into your thoughts. We move again at first light. You find a relatively clean corner of the farmhouse and sink down, your back against the wall. All around, the other members of your squad are already asleep, the exhaustion of combat overcoming even the hardest veteran. But sleep doesn't come easily for you. You keep thinking about the maps you saw back at headquarters, the ones showing the grand strategic plan. The German offensive needs to reach the Channel ports to succeed, to cut off the British army from its supply lines and force it to surrender. That's still a long way off, dozens of miles through enemy territory. Can you maintain this pace? Can the German army sustain this kind of advance without collapsing from its own logistical problems? As you finally drift into an uneasy sleep, the question follows you into your dreams. What happens if this great offensive, this last desperate gamble, isn't enough? The answer would come soon enough, as the initial momentum of Operation Michael began to slow against stiffening British resistance. But that first day, March 21st, 1918, remains one of the most remarkable in military history, the day when it briefly seemed like Germany might snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. Outside the farmhouse, occasional artillery shells still land in the distance, their dull thumps a reminder that the war is far from over. The German advance has been historic, but the hardest tests are yet to come. Your eyelids grow heavy, the combination of physical exhaustion and the day's emotional roller coaster finally catching up to you. Unlike your comfortable bed where you're listening to this story, this French farmhouse floor offers little comfort, but to a soldier who's been awake for nearly 24 hours, it feels like luxury. As you surrender to sleep, one last thought flickers through your mind. Tomorrow will determine whether today was the beginning of Germany's victory or just another step on the long road to defeat. Early April 1918. 2 weeks into Operation Michael, the initial euphoria has faded, replaced by something more complicated, a mixture of pride at how far the German army has advanced and growing concern about what comes next. The muddy road stretching before you is jammed with vehicles, horse-drawn supply wagons, ammunition carts, field kitchens, ambulances. Nothing's moving. It's been this way for hours. You're no longer the frontline stormtrooper. Now you're Captain Werner Hoffmann, a logistics officer with the German 18th Army. Your job is making sure supplies reach the front, a job that's becoming nearly impossible. You wipe rain from your face, scanning the endless line of stalled transport. Unlike your warm, dry bed right now, you're standing in ankle-deep mud, your greatcoat soaked through, trying to solve an impossible puzzle. Sir, a young lieutenant splashes through the mud towards you, his face pinched with exhaustion. The 25th Division reports they're down to their last crates of ammunition. They're under heavy counterattack near Villers-Bretonneux. You check your map, though you hardly need to. You know exactly where the 25th is positioned and exactly how far they are from this stalled convoy. They're 15 kilometers from here, you say, folding the map. Even if we got moving right now, the supplies wouldn't reach them for hours. The lieutenant's face falls. You've both seen this scenario play out before in recent days. The German advance has been so rapid, so unexpected in its success that the supply lines can't keep up. The front is moving faster than the roads can be repaired, faster than the horse-drawn wagons can travel. "What about motor transport?" the lieutenant asks. You give a bitter laugh. "What motor transport? We've got 5 working trucks for the entire division, and they're all being used to move artillery. You don't mention the other problem, fuel. Germany has been scraping the bottom of its petroleum reserves for months now. The British blockade has seen to that. What little gasoline remains is being rationed with extreme care." A rumble of distant artillery punctuates your conversation. The British guns have found their range again, systematically targeting the road junctions and supply depots behind German lines. They may be retreating, but they're doing so in good order, making the German advance pay for every kilometre. "Sir, what do I tell the 25th? the lieutenant asks, bringing you back to the immediate problem. You rub your temples, feeling the beginning of another headache. You've had one almost constantly since the offensive began. Tell them to conserve ammunition, fire only when they have clear targets. And you hesitate, knowing what you're about to say violates every principle of modern warfare. Tell them they're authorized to use captured British supplies if they can find them. The lieutenant nods grimly. It's come to this, the German army, supposedly on the verge of its greatest victory, reduced to scavenging like vultures. "Oh, and Weber," you add as he turns to leave. "Find out what happened to the food shipments for the 9th Reserve. They've been reporting starvation rations for 3 days now." "Yes, sir." The lieutenant salutes and splashes back down the muddy road, weaving between the stalled vehicles. You sigh and turn your attention back to the immediate traffic jam. The problem is brutally simple. Too many vehicles, too few roads. The British, in their retreat, have blown every bridge, cratered every crossroads. German engineers are working around the clock to repair the damage. But they can't keep pace with the needs of an army of over 1 million men advancing across a muddy wasteland. Captain Hoffman. You turn to see a motorcycle courier skidding to a halt beside you, splattering your already filthy boots with fresh mud. The rider, barely more than a boy, snaps a salute. "New orders from Army Group Headquarters, sir." He hands you a sealed envelope. You tear it open, scanning the contents rapidly. Then you read it again, more slowly, making sure you haven't misunderstood. "Is this a joke?" you ask the courier, who looks confused. "Sir?" "These orders. They're changing the entire axis of advance. Again." The courier shrugs. He's just the messenger. You dismiss him with a wave and stare at the paper in your hand, fighting the urge to crumple it and throw it into the mud. This is the 3rd time in 10 days that High Command, which means Ludendorff, has changed the primary objective of the offensive. First, it was a drive northwest toward the Channel ports. Then it shifted south toward Amiens. Now it's being split in multiple directions simultaneously, with your 18th Army ordered to push due west, while other formations drive north and south. God in heaven, you mutter. Every change of direction means reconfiguring the entire supply network. New routes, new depots, new priorities. And you've barely got the current system working. You tuck the orders into your pocket and start making your way toward the staff car that will take you back to division headquarters. You need to completely redraw the supply distribution plan again. The car is parked a kilometre back, the driver unwilling to risk getting stuck in the mud any closer to the front. As you trudge along the roadside, you pass hundreds of German soldiers, not frontline troops, but the supporting elements that make modern war possible. Engineers repairing roads, signals, units stringing telephone wire, field hospital staff setting up new aid stations. All of them look exhausted, hollow-eyed, moving with the mechanical precision of men running on willpower alone. The initial elan of the offensive has faded, replaced by grinding determination. Captain, you turn to see a group of soldiers clustered around a dead horse. One of them, a sergeant with a butcher's cleaver in his hand, waves you over. "Sir, we need an officer's authorization." You approach warily. "For what, Sergeant?" He gestures to the horse, a big draft animal that must have pulled one of the supply wagons until it collapsed from exhaustion or disease. "Regulations say we need an officer to confirm it's dead before we can process it." "Process it," you repeat, then understanding dawns. "You want to butcher it for food?" "Yes, sir. My men haven't had a proper meal in 3 days. The supply wagons with our rations never caught up." You look at the men gathered around the dead horse. Their faces are gaunt, their uniforms hanging loosely on frames that have grown thin over years of blockade and rationing. The Great Offensive was supposed to capture British supply dumps, allowing the German army to feast on enemy provisions. And it had, for a few days. But those captured supplies were quickly exhausted, and now the men are hungry again. "It's against regulations," you say, but without conviction. "That meat should be inspected by a veterinary officer. It could be diseased." The sergeant's face remains impassive, but his eyes hold a silent plea. You know what he's thinking. Disease tomorrow is better than starvation today. You sigh. "I didn't see anything. Carry on, Sergeant." "Thank you, sir." The relief in his voice is palpable. As you walk away, you hear the wet sounds of the butchering begin. 4 years of war has reduced the proud German army to this, carving up dead horses by the roadside. Back at division headquarters, a requisitioned French farmhouse that still bears the scars of shell fire. You find the staff officers gathered around a large map table. "Ah, Hoffman, there you are." Colonel Weiss, the division quartermaster, beckons you over. "Did you get the new orders?" You nod, producing the crumpled paper from your pocket. "I did, and I have to ask, sir, are they serious? We're changing direction again." The colonel's mouth tightens into a thin line. "Ludendorff's orders, the 18th Army is to press west toward Amiens, while the 17th turns north." "But, sir, we've just spent 3 days reconfiguring the supply lines for the last change of direction. The men at the front are already running short of ammunition and food. If we change plans again now—" "I know, Captain." Weiss cuts you off with a raised hand. "Believe me, I know, but these are our orders." You take a deep breath, controlling your frustration. "May I ask what the strategic objective is now? What are we trying to achieve?" The colonel hesitates, exchanging glances with the other staff officers. "Truthfully, Hoffman, I'm not sure anyone knows anymore. Ludendorff keeps changing the target based on where we're having tactical success. First it was the Channel ports, then splitting the British and French armies. Now it's Amiens." "But Amiens is just a city," you protest. "What does taking it achieve strategically?" "It's a rail hub," offers Major Schmidt, the operations officer. "If we capture it, we disrupt British logistics." You bite back a laugh. "With respect, sir, we can barely manage our own logistics. What good does it do to disrupt theirs?" The room falls silent. "You've gone too far. Questioning strategy isn't a captain's place. But you're not alone in your doubts. You can see it in the officers' faces." "The plan now," Colonel Weiss says carefully, "is to capture Amiens, then resume the drive to the Channel ports." You nod, keeping further objections to yourself, but you can do the math as well as anyone. The German offensive has been underway for 2 weeks. In that time, you've advanced nearly 40 miles in some sectors, an unprecedented achievement after years of stalemate. But the advance is slowing daily as supply problems mount and Allied resistance stiffens. and the Channel ports are still more than 60 miles away. Captain Hoffman, the colonel says, bringing you back to the matter at hand, I need you to reorganize the supply distribution for the new axis of advance, priority to ammunition and medical supplies, then food. Yes, sir. You salute and turn to the logistics maps pinned to one wall of the farmhouse. It's going to be another long night. Hours later, you're still at it, your eyes burning from strain and cigarette smoke. The new supply plan is taking shape, but it's a pale shadow of what proper logistics should look like. Too many compromises, too many units that will have to manage with inadequate supplies. A commotion outside draws your attention. The sound of a motor vehicle, then voices raised in excitement. Curious, you step outside. A staff car has pulled up, mud-splattered, but still somehow maintaining an air of authority. From it emerges a figure you recognize instantly. General von Hutier, commander of the 18th Army. The general is engaged in animated conversation with Colonel Weiss and several other senior officers. You move closer, trying to catch what they're saying without being obtrusive. Confirmed it myself, von Hutier is saying. The British are bringing up fresh divisions from Flanders. Their resistance around Villers-Bretonneux is stiffening. What about the French? Asks Colonel Weiss. Are they moving to support the British? The general nods grimly. Elements of the French First Army are already in the line south of the Somme. They're establishing a new defensive position. This is concerning news. The whole premise of Operation Michael was to defeat the British before the French could intervene in force. If French divisions are already reinforcing the line, it means the offensive isn't moving fast enough. And what does High Command say about this? Asks Major Schmidt. Von Hutier's expression darkens. Ludendorff insists we press the attack. He believes one more push will break them. There's a moment of silence as the officers digest this. You can read the doubt on their faces. One more push? The German army has been pushing for 2 weeks, advancing farther and faster than anyone thought possible, and still the decisive breakthrough hasn't materialized. Sir, Colonel Weiss says carefully, my logistics officer informs me that our supply situation is becoming critical. The men at the front are running short of ammunition and food. Von Hutier's eyes find you, and you straighten instinctively. Is this true, Captain? Hoffman, sir. Captain Hoffman, 18th Army Logistics. And yes, sir, it's true. The advance has outrun our supply lines. The roads are choked with traffic. Bridges are down. And we simply don't have enough transport to keep the forward units properly supplied. The general considers this for a moment. What about captured British supplies? Largely exhausted, sir. The British are becoming more effective at destroying depots before they retreat. Von Hutier nods, unsurprised but clearly unhappy. I'll convey your concerns to High Command, Colonel, but I should warn you, Ludendorff is not in a mood to hear about problems. He wants solutions and victory. The general returns to his car, leaving the officers looking at each other in consternation. No one wants to say what they're all thinking, that perhaps victory isn't possible, at least not the total victory Ludendorff demands. As the staff car drives away, splashing through muddy puddles, Colonel Weiss turns to you. Captain, I need updated figures on ammunition reserves by morning, and find out what's happening with those food shipments for the 9th Reserve. Yes, sir. You salute and head back inside, your mind racing. The situation is becoming increasingly clear to you, and it's not encouraging. The German offensive has achieved remarkable tactical success, driving the Allies back farther than anyone thought possible. But it's also revealed the fundamental weakness of the German position. You simply don't have the resources for a sustained offensive. The blockade has left Germany scraping the bottom of its strategic reserves. Food, fuel, raw materials, everything is in short supply, and the Americans are coming, tens of thousands arriving in France every week. This offensive isn't a war-winning masterstroke. It's a desperate gamble by a nation that's running out of options. Back at your desk, you pull out the latest inventory reports and begin updating the ammunition figures. The numbers are worse than you expected. Several forward units report they're down to their last few crates of shells. Machine gun ammunition is critically low in at least 3 divisions. Captain Hoffman? You look up to see Lieutenant Weber, the young officer you sent to check on the 25th Division earlier. His uniform is caked with mud, and he has the 1,000-yard stare of someone who's seen combat up close. Lieutenant, what news from the front? He slumps into a chair opposite your desk. The 25th held, but it was close. They had to fix bayonets toward the end. The British brought up tanks. Not many, but enough to cause problems. You push a cup of ersatz coffee toward him. It's barely warm and tastes nothing like the real thing, but it's wet and contains some calories. And the 9th Reserve? Did you find out about their food situation? Weber takes a long swallow of the poor excuse for coffee. The convoy carrying their rations was shelled yesterday. Direct hit. They've been living on whatever they can scrounge, mostly stale bread and some canned meat they captured during the initial advance. You make a note to divert the next available food shipment to the 9th, but it's a zero-sum game. Whatever you give them comes at the expense of some other unit. Sir, if I may, Weber hesitates, choosing his words carefully. The men are asking questions. They want to know why we've slowed down, why we haven't broken through completely. They were told this offensive would end the war. You set down your pencil and regard the young officer thoughtfully. And what do you tell them, Lieutenant? I tell them to focus on their jobs. That strategy is for the generals to worry about. He meets your eyes. But between us, sir, do you think this offensive can still succeed? It's a dangerous question. Expressing doubt about the offensive could be construed as defeatism, even treason. But you're both officers, and sugarcoating the truth serves no one. Tactically, we've already succeeded beyond anyone's expectations, you say carefully. But strategically, the Channel ports are still far away. The British are bringing up reserves, the French are reinforcing them, and our own supply situation is deteriorating daily. You shrug. Draw your own conclusions, Lieutenant. Weber nods slowly. I was at the front this morning. The British shells, they're brand new, not a speck of rust on the fragments, and they have so many of them. Our batteries have to ration their fire, but their guns never stop. It's a telling observation. The Allies have access to the factories and resources of half the world. Germany is running on empty after 4 years of blockade. Get some rest, Weber, you say, turning back to your inventory reports. Tomorrow won't be any easier. After the lieutenant leaves, you continue working late into the night. The farmhouse grows quiet as other staff officers seek what little sleep they can find. Outside, the distant rumble of artillery continues, a constant reminder that the war goes on. Around midnight, you step outside for a cigarette, your last one of the day. The rain has stopped, and through breaks in the clouds, you can see stars. The front is quiet for the moment, an unusual silence that feels almost eerie after weeks of continuous fighting. In that silence, you allow yourself to confront the truth you've been avoiding. Operation Michael is faltering, the advance is slowing, the supply situation is critical, and the strategic objectives remain out of reach. Ludendorff keeps changing direction, chasing tactical successes rather than sticking to a coherent strategy. It was a brilliant offensive, perhaps the most successful in the war, but it's not going to be enough. You finish your cigarette and grind it out beneath your boot. Time to get back to work. The war doesn't stop for your doubts or fears. As April continues, your pessimistic assessment proves increasingly accurate. The German advance slows to a crawl, then stops altogether. British and French counterattacks begin to push back in places. The grand offensive that was supposed to win the war becomes instead another bloody stalemate. And in the exhausted, hungry faces of the German soldiers, you begin to see something new and troubling, the first signs of a collapse in morale. It's subtle at first, a growing number of sick call reports, soldiers losing equipment, small acts of insubordination. But as April turns to May, these isolated incidents coalesce into a pattern that can't be ignored. The German army, that magnificent fighting machine, is starting to come apart at the seams. Back in your makeshift office, you update the logistics maps one more time, moving pins to show the latest positions. Unlike your comfortable bed where you're listening to this story now, your chair is hard, the room is cold, and the sense of impending failure hangs in the air like smoke. The offensive that began with such high hopes is sputtering out, and as you mark the static front lines, you can't escape the nagging question, what comes next? If this great gamble has failed, what options remain for Germany? The answer would come soon enough, in the form of an Allied counter-offensive that would shatter what remained of Germany's fighting spirit and drive it toward final defeat. But that's a story for another time. For now, you fold your maps, blow out your candle, and try to find a few hours of sleep before dawn brings new crises, new demands, and the continuing struggle to supply an army that has advanced too far, too fast in its desperate bid to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. Dawn, August 8th, 1918. Outside the French town of Amiens. A heavy mist blankets the battlefield, wrapping everything in an eerie, silent shroud. The perfect morning for an attack, if you're the one doing the attacking. You're Major Friedrich Keller, commander of a German infantry battalion holding a section of the line east of Amiens. You've been awake since 3 a.m., a knot of dread growing in your stomach with each passing hour. Something's coming, you can feel it. Unlike your cozy bed where you're listening to this story, you're sitting in a damp dugout 10 feet below ground, the wooden supports creaking ominously overhead. Your uniform sticks to you in the muggy August heat, and the smell of unwashed bodies and stale cigarette smoke fills the cramped space. "Still quiet, sir," reports Lieutenant Müller, returning from his inspection of the forward positions. "No movement in no man's land. But what, Lieutenant?" Müller hesitates. "The men are nervous, sir. They say it's too quiet, and some claim they heard engines during the night." You nod slowly. You heard them too. A distant mechanical rumble, quickly swallowed by the darkness. Tanks, most likely. The British have been using them more frequently since the German offensive stalled in April. "How are the men otherwise?" you ask, though you already know the answer. Müller's face says it all. Exhaustion, hunger, declining morale. Your battalion is at less than half strength after months of heavy fighting. The replacements you've received are mostly teenagers with minimal training or older men who should never have been drafted. And everyone is hungry. The supply situation, never good, has become catastrophic in recent weeks. "Sir," Müller says quietly, "Weber's platoon is down to 10 rounds per man, and Hoffmann reports his machine gun only has 2 belts left." You swallow hard. 10 rounds and 2 machine gun belts won't last 5 minutes in a serious attack. You've been requesting ammunition for 3 days, but nothing has arrived. The entire logistics system seems to be breaking down. What about food? 1 meal yesterday. Turnip soup and a slice of bread. Nothing since. You check your watch. 4:45 a.m. First light will come soon. If the British are going to attack, it will be at dawn. Alert the company commanders, you say, making your decision. I want every man at his post by 5:15. And Muller, sir, tell them to make every shot count. The lieutenant salutes and ducks out of the dugout. You follow a moment later, climbing the muddy steps to ground level. Above ground, the mist is even thicker than it appeared through the dugout's small window. You can barely see 30 meters in any direction. Your front line, if the scattered foxholes and hastily dug rifle pits can be dignified with that term, stretches across a gentle slope facing west toward the British positions. You make your way along the line, checking positions, offering words of encouragement to the men. Their faces are hollow-eyed and gaunt, their uniforms hanging loose on frames wasted by months of inadequate rations. But they're Germans, professionals, and they nod respectfully as you pass. Major Keller. A corporal whose name you can't remember salutes with a hand that trembles slightly. Sir, is it true the Americans are coming? You pause. Rumours about the Americans have been circulating for months. Most of your men have never faced them, but the stories grow with each telling. Millions of fresh troops, well-fed, well-equipped, eager for battle. Focus on what's in front of you, Corporal, you say, evading the question. The British are problem enough for today. It's 5:30 a.m. now, and the mist shows no sign of lifting. An unnatural silence hangs over the battlefield. No birds, no distant gunfire, not even the usual morning artillery harassment. Just silence and the mist and the growing sense that something terrible is about to happen. You reach the centre of your line, where Sergeant Meyer has positioned your 2 remaining machine guns to cover the most likely avenue of attack. Meyer, a veteran of Verdun and the Somme, has an almost supernatural sense for defensive positioning. "Morning, sir," he grunts, not taking his eyes off the misty void before you. "Going to be a bad day." You don't bother disagreeing. Meyer has seen too much war to be reassured by empty words. "How many men do you have?" you ask instead. 7, including the gunners. Not enough. 7 men to hold the centre of your line. A year ago, you would have had 30 plus supporting firepower, but that was before Operation Michael drained the German reserves, before the counterattacks that pushed you back to this position outside Amiens. "Make do, Sergeant. I'll try to..." You never finish the sentence. At 5:42 a.m. precisely, the world explodes around you. Hundreds of British guns open fire simultaneously, a deafening barrage that seems to engulf the entire universe. The ground bucks beneath your feet, throwing you face first into the mud. All along your line, men are scrambling for cover, diving into foxholes or hugging the earth as shells rain down. But something's different about this barrage. Instead of targeting your front line, most of the shells are landing behind you, on your reserve positions, your artillery, your command posts. It's not a preparatory bombardment designed to clear the way for infantry. It's something else. You crawl to Meyer's position, half blind from the mud in your eyes. "Counter-battery fire," you shout over the din, but you can barely hear your own voice. "They're taking out our guns." Meyer nods grimly, understanding the significance. If the British are concentrating on your artillery rather than your forward positions, it means... "Tanks!" someone screams from further down the line. "Tanks coming." And there they are, materializing out of the mist like monsters from a nightmare. Not the handful of tanks you expected, but dozens of them, square, lumbering shapes pushing through the fog in a wide line, their engines roaring. Behind them, you catch glimpses of infantry, British soldiers advancing in small groups using the tanks for cover. It's a combined arms attack, the most dangerous kind, and it's coming straight at your undermanned, under-equipped battalion. "Open fire," you shout, but even as the words leave your mouth, you know it's futile. Your men have too little ammunition to stop this kind of assault. The machine guns chatter briefly, and rifle fire cracks from your line, but it's like trying to stop a flood with a handful of sand. The tanks keep coming, impervious to your small arms fire. They're Mark V's, the newest British model, faster and more reliable than their predecessors. And mixed among them are smaller, faster tanks, the new French Renault FTs, each mounting a small cannon that's already firing at your positions. "Fall back," you order, making the only decision that might save some of your men. Fall back to the second line. But even as your battalion begins a fighting retreat, you realize with sickening clarity that there is no real second line. The German reserves are too thin, the defensive positions too hastily prepared. This isn't going to be a fighting retreat, it's going to be a rout. The next hours pass in a blur of smoke, noise, and terror. Your battalion disintegrates under the combined weight of the tanks and infantry. Some men stand and fight until they're killed or captured. Others throw down their weapons and surrender immediately. A few simply run. By noon, you find yourself with a mixed group of about 40 men, all that remains of your battalion, in a shallow ravine 2 kilometers behind what used to be your front line. The British advance seems to have temporarily outrun itself, giving you a brief respite. Müller you call, looking for your adjutant, but there's no response. You haven't seen him since the first wave of tanks hit your position. "He's gone, sir," says a filthy, blood-spattered lieutenant you recognize as Weber from 3rd Company. "Saw him get hit when we were pulling back from the 2nd position." You nod, absorbing this news with a numb detachment that surprises you. Müller is dead, or wounded, or captured, just like hundreds of other men under your command. And for what? What's the situation elsewhere, you ask? Any word from regiment? Weber shakes his head. Communications are cut, but it looks bad all along the line. The British broke through everywhere. I saw hundreds of our men surrendering. This matches what you witnessed during the retreat. Groups of German soldiers, sometimes entire units, throwing down their weapons and raising their hands as the tanks approached. Not just the young replacements either, but veteran troops who'd fought bravely for years. "They didn't even try to fight," says a grizzled sergeant, giving voice to your thoughts. "Just gave up, like they'd been waiting for an excuse." You can't entirely blame them. Underfed, under-equipped, outnumbered, and facing an enemy with seemingly limitless resources. It's a wonder anyone is still fighting at all. "We need to link up with whatever's left of the division," you decide. "Head east, try to find the new line, if there is one." No one argues. These men are still following orders, still behaving like soldiers, but as you lead them eastward, skirting the advancing British, you pass more and more Germans going the other way, hands raised, walking west into captivity. The sight is profoundly disturbing. These aren't just stragglers or isolated groups. These are entire companies, even battalions surrendering en masse. You've never seen anything like it in 4 years of war. By late afternoon, you've managed to locate what's left of your regiment, a mixed force of about 300 men under the command of a captain whose name you don't recognize. The regimental commander is missing, presumed captured or killed. Keller, the captain, greets you with obvious relief. "Thank God. I need someone to organize our left flank." You set about the task automatically, positioning your 40 men to cover a section of the hastily established new line, but your mind is elsewhere, trying to process what you witnessed today. This wasn't just a tactical defeat. Something fundamental broke in the German army today. A collapse in the will to fight that's more dangerous than any British tank or artillery barrage. As evening approaches, bringing a blessed cooling of the August heat, a staff car arrives at the regimental command post. From it emerges a colonel from division headquarters, his uniform immaculate despite the day's chaos. You're called to join the other surviving officers for a briefing. The colonel looks exhausted, his face grey with fatigue and strain. "Gentlemen," he begins without preamble, "I won't sugarcoat this. Today has been a disaster. The British and French broke through on a 15-kilometre front to a depth of nearly 8 kilometres. We've lost thousands of men, hundreds of guns, and vast quantities of supplies." He pauses, looking around at your dirty, blood-streaked faces. But worse than the material losses are the mass surrenders. Entire units laid down their arms without a fight. Preliminary reports suggest up to 16,000 prisoners taken, most of them unwounded. A murmur runs through the assembled officers. 16,000 men captured in a single day is unprecedented. General Ludendorff has been informed, the colonel continues. He's calling it the Black Day of the German army, and he's not wrong. The phrase hangs in the air like a death sentence. The Black Day of the German army. After 4 years of war, after all the sacrifices and victories, it has come to this. "What happens now, sir?" someone asks. The colonel spreads his hands in a gesture of uncertainty. "We hold where we can, we retreat where we must, and we hope that High Command finds a way out of this mess." It's not a reassuring answer. As the officers disperse to their units, you find yourself walking alongside the colonel, who seems lost in thought. "Sir," you venture, "may I ask a question?" He glances at you, seeming to really see you for the first time. "Go ahead, Major." "The men who surrendered today? Why now? They've fought bravely for years. What changed?" The colonel stops walking, considering the question seriously. "Many things, Major. The failure of our spring offensive, the arrival of the Americans, the tank attack this morning, which was certainly terrifying," he sighs. "But underneath all that, I think they simply lost hope. They no longer believe Germany can win this war." The words strike you with the force of revelation. That's what you saw in the eyes of the men surrendering. Not cowardice, not even fear, but a complete absence of hope. They had given everything they had for 4 long years, and it wasn't enough. "And can we?" you ask quietly. "Win the war, I mean." The colonel gives you a long, measuring look. "Officially, of course we can." Ludendorff still speaks of victory. He glances around to ensure no one is within earshot. "Unofficially, no, Major. We cannot win this war. The question now is whether we can achieve a negotiated peace before Germany itself collapses." He walks away, leaving you standing alone in the gathering dusk. Around you, the remnants of your regiment are digging in, preparing for the British attack that will surely come tomorrow. They're still soldiers, still following orders, but you wonder how long that will last now that hope is gone. Later that night, as you try to grab a few hours of sleep in a shallow foxhole, you find yourself thinking about the colonel's words. The Black Day of the German army. A day when not just bodies, but spirits broke. And as you drift into an uneasy slumber, you wonder what Ludendorff is thinking tonight, as reports of the disaster flow into High Command. Does he finally understand that his great gamble has failed? That Germany has spent its last reserves of strength and found them insufficient? Or is he still clinging to the belief that somehow, against all evidence, Germany can snatch victory from the jaws of defeat? The answer would become clear in the days and weeks that followed as the Allied advance continued and the German army retreated toward its own borders. The retreat was orderly at first, but as summer turned to autumn, discipline continued to erode, and the cracks that appeared on August 8th widened into chasms. And at German high command, Ludendorff faced a reckoning of his own. His initial reaction to the August 8 disaster was shock, followed quickly by denial. In a meeting with his staff officers the day after the battle, he insisted that the collapse was just a local setback, that the line could be restored, that Germany could still win the war. But as more reports came in, not just of tactical defeats, but of whole units refusing orders, of thousands of men surrendering without a fight, even Ludendorff could no longer deny the reality. The German army, that magnificent instrument of war that he had driven to the limits of its endurance, was beginning to come apart. On August 14th, in a meeting with the Kaiser and senior government officials, Ludendorff finally admitted what many had known for months. Germany could not win the war militarily. The time had come to seek a negotiated peace, but it was too late. The Allies, sensing victory, had no interest in negotiations, and the German collapse, once begun, accelerated with each passing day. By the end of September, Bulgaria had surrendered, exposing Germany's southern flank. The Ottoman Empire was on the verge of collapse. Austria-Hungary, Germany's last remaining ally, was disintegrating as its various ethnic components sought independence. And on the Western Front, the Allied advance continued relentlessly. American troops, fresh and well supplied, were arriving at the rate of 300,000 per month. The British and French armies, bolstered by thousands of tanks and aircraft, pushed forward day by day, reclaiming the ground lost during the spring offensive and more. The German army fought on, but its heart was no longer in the battle. Desertions increased, discipline frayed, and morale, that essential but fragile quality that sustains armies in the darkest hours, continued its inexorable decline. For you, Major Keller, the months following the Black Day became a blur of desperate rearguard actions, hasty retreats and dwindling resources. Your battalion, reconstituted with whatever men could be scraped together, shrank with each engagement. Ammunition grew scarcer, food more meagre, replacements fewer and younger, and always, always there was the sense that the end was approaching. Not victory, not even an honourable draw, but defeat, clear and total. By October, as the Allied armies approached the German border, the signs of collapse were unmistakable. Soldiers were openly discussing revolution, forming councils, electing their own leaders. The officers' authority, once absolute, was increasingly nominal. The Germany you had fought for, the proud Imperial Germany of the Kaiser and the General Staff, was dying before your eyes, consumed by the very war that was supposed to make it great. And as you huddle in your foxhole on yet another cold, wet night, listening to the distant rumble of Allied artillery preparing tomorrow's advance, you find yourself wondering, was it all worth it? The millions dead, the destroyed cities, the shattered lives, what was it all for? Unlike your warm bed where you're listening to this story now, your foxhole is cold, damp and lonely, but at least it gives you a moment of quiet to contemplate how your country, your army, your world came to this moment of reckoning. The Black Day of August 8th, 1918 was not just a military defeat. It was the day when the German will to continue the war finally broke, setting in motion a chain of events that would lead to revolution, abdication, and ultimately surrender. And as you drift into an uneasy sleep, the question echoes in your mind. How much longer can Germany hold out before the final collapse? Late October 1918, Berlin, the once proud imperial capital, has become a city of shadows and whispers, of hunger and fear, of quiet desperation. You're Elsa Weber, 32 years old, a factory worker at the Krupp munitions plant in the industrial district. Before the war, you were a seamstress, but like millions of German women, you've been drafted into the war economy. Your husband Franz has been fighting on the Western Front since 1914. Your last letter from him arrived 3 months ago. The factory whistle signals the end of your 12-hour shift. Unlike your cozy bed right now, your world is all sharp edges and cold surfaces, the unforgiving metal of the machines, the hard wooden stool that's left your back aching, the concrete floor that's numbed your feet. You join the stream of workers filing toward the exit, mostly women with a scattering of old men and boys too young for the army. Everyone looks grey, from their clothing to their skin to the dull resignation in their eyes. 4 years of war and blockade have leached the colour from Berlin. Elsa! A hand catches your arm. It's Magda from the next workstation, her voice low despite the noise of the factory. Meeting tonight, usual place, 8 o'clock. You nod slightly, careful not to show any reaction. The meetings are technically illegal, workers gathering to discuss politics, wages, and increasingly, peace. The government calls it sedition, but such meetings are happening all over Berlin now, all over Germany. The authorities can't stop them all. Outside, a cold drizzle is falling, turning the streets into shallow rivers of mud and garbage. You pull your thin coat tighter, but it does little to keep out the October chill. Like everything else in Germany, coat fabric has been steadily declining in quality as the blockade stretches on. The British naval blockade. 4 years of slowly strangling Germany, cutting off food imports, raw materials, anything that might sustain the war effort. For the first couple of years, life went on almost normally. Then came the turnip winter of 1916-1917, when potatoes ran out and people survived on turnips meant for livestock. Last winter was worse. This winter, with the harvest ruined by bad weather and lack of fertilizer, promises to be catastrophic. Papers, show your papers. A military patrol has set up a checkpoint at the next corner. This is new. Military police checking identification within the city. Another sign of the government's growing fear of its own people. You produce your identity card and factory work permit. The officer barely glances at them before waving you through. He looks as hungry and tired as everyone else. Your apartment is a 20-minute walk from the factory in a working-class district where the buildings stand shoulder to shoulder, blocking out what little daylight penetrates the perpetual haze of coal smoke. The stairwell is dark. Electricity is strictly rationed now, available only a few hours each day. You climb 4 flights to your small apartment. It's cold inside. Coal is another luxury in short supply. You go straight to the kitchen and check your food supplies, though you already know exactly what's there. Half a loaf of the grey, dense bread that's become standard fare, made with sawdust and potato peelings to stretch the flour. A small chunk of turnip. 3 withered carrots, no meat, no eggs, no milk. Those are distant memories. Your official ration card allows you to buy about 1,000 calories of food per day, half what an adult needs, and that's assuming the shops have anything to sell. Most days, they don't. The black market thrives, but prices are astronomical. Last week, a woman at the factory sold her wedding ring for £2 of real flour. You put a pot of water on to boil. The turnip and carrots will make a thin soup. You've become skilled at ignoring your constant hunger, at convincing yourself that the gnawing emptiness in your belly is normal. As you're chopping the vegetables with meticulous care, not a scrap can be wasted. There's a knock at the door. Your heart jumps to your throat. Late afternoon visits usually mean bad news. It's your neighbour, Frau Schmidt, a war widow with 2 young children. Her face tells you she hasn't come with bad news, just desperation. Elsa, I'm sorry to bother you. Her voice is barely above a whisper. But do you have anything? Anything at all? The children haven't eaten since yesterday morning. You look at the vegetables on your cutting board. Your dinner and breakfast tomorrow if you're careful. Then you sigh and divide the pitiful pile in half. It's not much, you say, wrapping her portion in a scrap of newspaper. God bless you. Tears spring to her eyes as she takes the package. When this war ends, she doesn't finish the sentence. None of you talk about the end of the war anymore, not out loud. It feels like tempting fate. After she leaves, you finish making your soup, even thinner now, little more than hot water with a hint of vegetable flavour. You eat slowly, making each spoonful last, soaking up the last drops with a small piece of bread. You save the rest of the bread for tomorrow. After dinner, you try to read a book, but the words swim before your eyes. The constant hunger makes it hard to concentrate. Instead, you doze fitfully until it's time for the meeting. The usual place is the basement of a bombed-out church 3 streets over. The building was hit during an Allied air raid last year, but the basement remains sound. The parish priest, a quiet man with radical ideas, turns a blind eye to the workers who gather there. You arrive at 10 minutes past 8, deliberately late to avoid drawing attention. The basement is already crowded, perhaps 30 people sitting on salvaged pews or standing along the walls. A single lantern provides meagre light, throwing giant shadows across the stone walls. You spot Magda and make your way to her side. "What's happening?" you whisper. "Why the urgent meeting?" "News from the front," she says. "Bad news. Carl's brother is a telegraph operator at Army headquarters. He smuggled out a report. Carl is a foreman at the factory, one of the few men in positions of authority who sympathizes with the workers." He steps forward now, holding a crumpled piece of paper. "Comrades," he says, using the term that has become increasingly common in these gatherings, "I have information that the government and the newspapers are hiding from us. The German army is in full retreat on the Western Front. The Americans are pouring in thousands of fresh troops every day. Our men are surrendering by the hundreds." A murmur runs through the crowd. Everyone has heard rumours, of course, but to have it confirmed... "There's more," Karl continues. "Bulgaria has surrendered. The Ottoman Empire is collapsing. Austria-Hungary is disintegrating. Germany stands alone, and our armies are crumbling. So we've lost," says an older man near the front. "The war is over." "Not officially," Karl says grimly. Ludendorff and the High Command are still talking about strategic withdrawals and shortened lines. The Kaiser still believes in victory. They'll fight to the last man, our husbands, our sons, our brothers. This lands like a physical blow. You think of Franz, somewhere on the Western Front. Is he still alive? Is he one of those surrendering? Or is he among the dwindling number still fighting, still dying for a war that's already lost? "What can we do?" someone asks. A younger man stands up, his face flushed with anger despite his obvious hunger. "We strike, we shut down the factories. No more bullets, no more shells, no more war." This brings both cheers and fearful murmurs. A strike in wartime is treason, punishable by military tribunal. "It's already happening," Karl says, raising his hands for quiet. "Workers in Hamburg and Munich have walked out. The sailors at Kiel are refusing to follow orders. There's talk of revolution. Revolution. The word hangs in the air, dangerous and thrilling. Ever since the Russian Revolution last year, it's been on people's lips, whispered in factories and bread lines and tenements. "What about the soldiers?" Magda asks. "Will they fire on their own people if we strike?" Karl shakes his head. No one knows. Some units are still loyal to the Kaiser. Others, the men coming back from the front, have seen too much. They won't defend this regime. The discussion continues, growing heated at times. Should you strike immediately? Wait for other factories to move first? What about the socialists in the Reichstag? Will they support the workers? You listen, but you find your mind wandering to more immediate concerns. If you strike, you won't be paid. Without pay, you can't buy food, not even the inadequate rations currently available. How long before you starve? But if the war continues, how many more will die at the front? How much more will Germany suffer before the inevitable end? The meeting breaks up after an hour with no firm decision. We'll reconvene tomorrow, Karl says. Spread the word, but carefully. You walk home through streets darkened by the blackout, imposed because of sporadic Allied air raids. The city feels like a corpse, cold, still, emptied of life. In windows here and there, you see the faint glow of candles. Electricity is cut off after 8 p.m. now to save coal. The next morning, you wake before dawn, as usual, and prepare for work. Your breakfast is a thin slice of grey bread, carefully measured to leave enough for dinner. You're always hungriest in the morning, after the long night without food. The streets are busy with workers, heading to factories and offices, a grim procession in the half-light. But as you approach the Krupp works, you sense something different. A crowd has gathered outside the main gates, hundreds of workers standing in silence. "What's happening?" you ask a woman on the edge of the crowd. "Strike," she says simply. "No one's going in." Your heart races. So it's begun. Without any formal decision, without leaders or manifestos, the workers have simply decided to stop. You join the crowd, stamping your feet against the morning cold. There are no chants, no signs, no speeches, just the silent mass of bodies blocking the gates. Such a different kind of strike than before the war, when there would have been songs and red flags and fiery rhetoric. But hunger makes even anger difficult to sustain. Armed soldiers arrive within the hour, taking up positions across the street. Their rifles are loaded, bayonets fixed, but they make no move to disperse the crowd. The officer in charge looks uncertain, conferring with his sergeants, occasionally eyeing the workers with a mixture of apprehension and sympathy. These aren't the fearsome troops of 1914, the ones who marched off to war with flowers in their rifle barrels and unshakable confidence in their Kaiser. These are garrison troops, older men or walking wounded, as hungry and disillusioned as the factory workers they face. Mid-morning brings a delegation from the company, managers in suits flanked by more soldiers. They read an order declaring the strike illegal, demanding that workers return to their stations immediately. No one moves. The managers retreat, visibly shaken by this silent defiance. The soldiers remain, but still make no attempt to force the issue. By noon, word reaches you that other factories across Berlin have joined the strike. The movement is spreading, gaining strength even without formal organisation. "Look!" someone shouts, pointing down the street. A column of people is approaching, not soldiers or police, but civilians, hundreds of them. As they draw closer, you see their workers from other factories joining your strike in solidarity, and they're carrying a red flag. The sight electrifies the crowd. Here is the symbol that everyone recognizes, the emblem of workers' revolution that toppled the Tsar in Russia. Someone starts singing the Internationale, the anthem of international socialism, and others join in, the sound swelling until it fills the street. The soldiers watch, their expressions unreadable, but they don't intervene. By evening, most of industrial Berlin is on strike. The government declares martial law, but it's meaningless. They lack the loyal troops to enforce it. Reports filter in from other cities, Hamburg, Frankfurt, Munich, all experiencing worker uprisings. And then the most shocking news of all, the German fleet at Kiel is in open mutiny. Sailors have raised the red flag on several warships, arrested their officers, and formed revolutionary councils. The pride of Imperial Germany, its high seas fleet, has turned against the Kaiser. "It's really happening," Magda says, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Revolution." The next days pass in a blur of rumour, hunger, and growing expectation. The strike continues, spreading to essential services. Berlin's transport system shuts down. Gas and electricity become intermittent, then stop entirely in many districts. Food distribution, already inadequate, collapses completely. You survive on what little you've stored and what can be scrounged. The communal soup kitchens, organised by strikers, provide a meagre meal once a day, but it's barely enough to keep body and soul together. News arrives in fragments, often contradictory. The Kaiser has fled. No, he's rallying loyal troops. The Chancellor has resigned. The Social Democrats are forming a new government. The army has pledged loyalty to the revolution. No, units are marching on Berlin to crush it. On November 9th, you join thousands of other Berliners gathered in front of the Reichstag. The crowd is a strange mixture of jubilation and desperation, people celebrating the imminent end of the hated regime while simultaneously wondering where their next meal will come from. A man appears on the balcony. Karl Liebknecht, a radical socialist recently released from prison. His voice carries across the square. The wretched and shameful Habsburg-Hohenzollern rule has collapsed. The Kaiser has abdicated his officers and his generals have left Berlin. Workers, soldiers, citizens, the old order is no more. The crowd erupts in cheers, but you find yourself oddly unmoved. The Kaiser's abdication feels almost irrelevant now. Will it bring Franz home? Will it fill empty stomachs? Will it heal a nation shattered by 4 years of war? What happens now? You ask Magda, who has accompanied you to the square. She shrugs. A republic, they say. Democratic. No more Kaiser, no more junkers and generals running everything. And the war over, surely. The new government will sign an armistice. You nod, but wonder what kind of peace Germany can expect. Victory was long ago abandoned as a hope. Now the question is how severe the defeat will be. That evening, you return to your cold apartment. The electricity is off, so you light a precious candle. The strike means no pay, which means no money for the black market, which means your food supplies are dwindling to nothing. You're down to a heel of bread and a few wrinkled potatoes, enough for perhaps 2 more days. But as you're preparing your meagre dinner, there's a knock at the door. This time, it's not Frau Schmidt, but a young boy from the building, out of breath from running up the stairs. Frau Weber, there's a soldier downstairs asking for you. Your heart nearly stops. A soldier with news of Franz. You've been dreading this moment for 4 years. The official notification that your husband is dead or missing. You rush down the stairs, nearly falling in your haste. There, in the dim entrance hall, stands a figure in a mud-stained grey uniform. Franz? You whisper, hardly daring to hope. The figure turns, and despite the gauntness, despite the haunted eyes and premature lines, you recognise your husband. Elsa, he says, his voice cracked and unused. I came home. You're in his arms then, both of you crying, both of you feeling the shocking boniness of the other's body through the thin layers of clothing. 4 years of separation, of hunger, of fear, ending in this moment of disbelieving joy. Later, in your apartment, he tells his story in halting sentences. His unit surrendered to the British in late October, but in the confusion of the German retreat, he and a few others slipped away. They've been making their way back to Germany on foot, begging food from French villagers sleeping in barns and ditches. The army is finished, Elsa, he says. Not just defeated, disintegrated. Men are throwing down their weapons, walking away. Officers can't stop it. Nothing can stop it. And the war, you ask? Is it really ending? Yes. He takes your hand, his fingers trembling slightly. But what comes after? I don't know. Germany is broken, not just the army, everything. You sit together by candlelight, two survivors of a catastrophe that has consumed millions. Outside, Berlin continues its slow collapse. Food supplies dwindling, coal running out, authority dissolving. The revolution that began with the fleet mutiny and factory strikes is spreading across the country, sweeping away the old order. And beyond Germany's borders, the victorious Allies are preparing to dictate peace terms that will reshape Europe and burden Germany with guilt and reparations for decades to come. But in this moment, you and Franz have found each other again. It's not a happy ending. There are no happy endings to this war, not for anyone, but it's a survival, a continuation, a refusal to be broken completely. Unlike your warm bed where you're listening to this story, the apartment is cold, the future uncertain. But Franz is home and the killing has stopped. After 4 years of total war, that feels like enough for now. As November progresses, Germany continues its descent into revolution and chaos. The Kaiser flees to neutral Holland, generals and admirals resign or are dismissed, workers' and soldiers' councils take control in cities across the country. And on November 11th, 1918, in a railway carriage in the forest of Compiègne, German representatives sign an armistice that ends the fighting but seals Germany's defeat. The Great War is over, but the reckoning is just beginning. November 9th, 1918, German Army Headquarters, Spa, Belgium. Rain pounds against the windows of what was once a luxury hotel, now the nerve centre of a collapsing empire. You're Colonel Wilhelm Krieger, a staff officer attached to the German High Command. For 4 years, you've served in this building, watching as the grand ambitions of Imperial Germany withered and died. Now you're witnessing its final hours. Unlike your warm bed right now, you're sitting at a wooden desk in a room grown cold as the coal supplies dwindle. Maps cover the walls, maps showing the inexorable Allied advance, the shrinking German territory, the disintegration of the once mighty Central Powers. The door bursts open. It's Major Schmidt, his face pale despite the red flush of having run up 3 flights of stairs. Colonel, it's happening. Berlin is in full revolt. The Kaiser, he hesitates, as if saying the words might be treason. The Kaiser is preparing to leave for Holland. The Chancellor has resigned. You nod, unsurprised. The collapse has been coming for weeks, gathering momentum like an avalanche. First Bulgaria surrendering in September, then the Ottoman Empire in October, then Austria-Hungary disintegrating along ethnic lines. Germany, once the dominant power of the Central Alliance, now stands completely alone. And Ludendorff, you ask, though you already know the answer. Gone, sir. Resigned on October 26th. He's fled to Sweden under a false passport and a disguise. A fake beard, they say. The image would be comical if it weren't so tragic. The great Quartermaster General, the de facto military dictator of Germany for the past 2 years, sneaking across the border in a false beard. So it's just Hindenburg now. Yes, sir. The Field Marshal is meeting with what's left of the Kaiser's entourage. They're discussing abdication. Abdication. The word hangs in the air like a death sentence. Kaiser Wilhelm II, Emperor of Germany, King of Prussia, the living symbol of German imperial power, forced to give up his throne. What about the front, you ask, turning back to the maps? How long can we hold? Schmidt shakes his head. It's coming apart, sir. Mass surrenders, units refusing orders, officers being removed by their men. The Allies are advancing all along the line. The Americans broke through in the Meuse-Argonne. The British are pushing toward the German border. You trace the front line with your finger, noting how it's been pushed steadily eastward since August. The German army that seemed invincible in the spring now resembles a wounded animal, bleeding from 1,000 cuts. And the armistice negotiations? The delegation reached the French lines yesterday. They're being taken to Marshal Foch's headquarters by train, but the terms will be harsh, you finish for him. Of course they will be. We're in no position to bargain. Schmidt nods miserably. Like most German officers, he was raised on stories of Prussian glory, of Frederick the Great and Bismarck's triumphs. To witness this humiliation is almost more than he can bear. "Sir," he says hesitantly, "how did it come to this? In March we were advancing on Paris. We had knocked Russia out of the war. We were winning. It's the question everyone is asking, from the highest general to the lowliest private. How did Germany, with the most powerful army in the world, lose this war?" You sigh, running a hand through hair that has gone grey these past 4 years. "Sit down, Schmidt. Let me tell you a story. The story of how Germany lost the Great War." The Major takes a seat, his young face eager despite the disaster unfolding around you both. He's perhaps 25, part of the generation that will bear the burden of defeat long after you're gone. "It wasn't any one thing," you begin. "That's what makes it so tragic. It was a series of miscalculations, gambles that didn't pay off, fundamental weaknesses that we tried to ignore." You point to a map showing the initial German advance through Belgium in 1914. The first mistake was there, the Schlieffen Plan, a brilliant concept on paper, but it required everything to go perfectly. It demanded more than the army we actually had could deliver. When it failed at the Marne, we should have reassessed our entire strategy. Instead, we doubled down. Then there was the decision to violate Belgian neutrality, which brought Britain into the war. We turned a continental conflict into a world war against enemies with far greater resources and industrial capacity than our own. You move to another map, this one showing submarine warfare zones. The second great miscalculation was unrestricted submarine warfare. Ludendorff and the Navy promised it would strangle Britain within 6 months. Instead, it brought America into the war while failing to knock Britain out. We gambled everything on a strategy that had almost no chance of success. Schmidt nods slowly. And the blockade? The British blockade? Yes, that was perhaps their most effective weapon. Germany couldn't feed itself before the war. We imported about a quarter of our food. The blockade slowly strangled us. Our people have been starving for 2 years now. Even the army is on reduced rations. You stand, moving to the window. Outside, rain continues to fall on the Belgian town where Germany's military brain trust has spent the war directing millions of men across multiple fronts. But the real failure, Schmidt, was strategic. We never had a coherent plan for winning the war once the initial offensive failed. We just kept reacting, gambling, hoping for a miracle. Like Operation Michael, Schmidt says quietly. Exactly. The spring offensive was Ludendorff's last roll of the dice, and at first it seemed like it might work. We advanced further in 2 weeks than either side had managed in the previous 3 years. You turn back to the maps, tracing the bulge created by the German advance in March and April 1918. But Ludendorff had no clear strategic objective. He kept changing direction, chasing tactical successes instead of focusing on strategic goals like the Channel ports or splitting the British and French armies. And we outran our supply lines, Schmidt adds. The men at the front were starving even as they advanced. Yes, the offensive showed both our greatest strength and our fatal weakness. Tactically, we were brilliant. The stormtroopers, the infiltration tactics, the hurricane bombardment, but operationally and strategically, we failed completely. You return to your desk, sitting heavily in the wooden chair, and then, when the offensive stalled, we had nothing left. No strategic reserves, no new plan, just the hope that somehow the Allies would agree to a negotiated peace before the Americans arrived in force. "But they didn't," Schmidt says. Or no. Instead, they counterattacked in July and August, and our men, exhausted from the spring offensives, hungry from the blockade, disillusioned by years of futile sacrifice, began to break. August 8th, the Black Day, was when it became clear even to Ludendorff that the war was lost. Outside, the sound of vehicles draws your attention. Looking down from the window, you see staff cars being loaded with luggage and document boxes. The evacuation has begun. And now, Schmidt asks, what happens now? A good question. The world you've known, Imperial Germany, the Hohenzollern monarchy, the Prussian military tradition, is crumbling before your eyes. In Berlin and other major cities, workers and soldiers are forming revolutionary councils modelled on the Russian Soviets. Red flags fly over the naval bases where the fleet has mutinied. Now, Germany pays the price for failure, you say. The Kaiser abdicates, the military accepts defeat, the politicians sign whatever armistice terms the Allies demand, and then you leave the sentence unfinished. The truth is, no one knows what comes next. Germany has never been a republic. The revolution spreading across the country could lead to democracy or Bolshevism or civil war. Sir, Schmidt says, interrupting your thoughts, there's something I don't understand. If Ludendorff knew the war was lost in August, why didn't we seek peace terms then? Why wait until now, when our position is so much worse? You smile grimly. Now we come to perhaps the greatest failure of all. When Ludendorff finally admitted defeat, he didn't want the military to bear responsibility, so he insisted that civilian politicians take over the government and request the armistice. He wanted them to shoulder the blame. The stab in the back, Schmidt says, nodding in understanding. Exactly. He's already laying the groundwork for the myth that the German army wasn't defeated in the field, but betrayed by civilians, socialists and Jews at home. It's a lie, of course. The army was beaten fair and square, but it's a lie many Germans will find comforting in the years to come. A knock at the door interrupts your conversation. It's a junior officer looking harried. Colonel, the Field Marshal requests your presence, immediately. You stand, straightening your uniform jacket. It seems duty calls, Schmidt. We'll continue this conversation another time, but you both know there won't be another time. The old Germany is dying, and with it, the army that has been your life. You follow the junior officer through corridors that were once bustling with staff officers and messengers, now eerily quiet as personnel evacuate. Hindenburg's office is on the top floor, a spacious room with windows overlooking the town. The Field Marshal is standing at those windows, his massive back to the door. At 71, Paul von Hindenburg remains an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with the iconic walrus moustache that adorns countless propaganda posters. "Colonel Krieger," he says without turning. Thank you for coming?" "Field Marshal." You stand at attention, waiting. Hindenburg finally turns to face you. His expression is granite, revealing nothing of the turmoil that must be raging within. The Kaiser has agreed to abdicate. The announcement will be made within hours. You maintain your military bearing, though the news hits you like a physical blow. The Kaiser abdicated. The 1,000-year Hohenzollern dynasty ended. It seems impossible. "I see, sir." Germany will become a republic, a democratic republic. Hindenburg pronounces the words as if they taste bitter. The socialists will form a government. They're already in contact with the Allies regarding armistice terms. And the army, sir? The army will continue to exist in some form. The new government will need it, if only to maintain order during the transition. He fixes you with a penetrating stare. The question is, Colonel, will you serve this new Germany, this republic born of defeat and revolution? It's a question you've been asking yourself for weeks as the collapse accelerated. Your entire adult life has been dedicated to the Kaiser and the Empire. Can you transfer that loyalty to a democratic republic led by socialists? I will serve Germany, Field Marshal, you say carefully. Whatever form it takes? Hindenburg nods, satisfied. Good, because I intend to do the same. Germany will need men like us in the difficult years ahead. He turns back to the window, a signal that the conversation is over. You salute, though his back is turned, and leave the room. In the corridor outside, you pause, leaning against the wall for support. The Kaiser abdicated, the war lost, the empire ended. It's too much to absorb all at once. The next 2 days pass in a blur of activity as the High Command prepares to withdraw from Belgium into Germany. Reports continue to flow in, revolution spreading across the country, the Kaiser fleeing to neutral Holland, socialist leader Friedrich Ebert forming a provisional government in Berlin. And then, on November 11th, at 5 a.m., the news you've been waiting for. The German delegation has signed the armistice. The fighting will cease at 11 a.m., the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, a moment of symmetry to end 4 years of chaos. You're in the communications room when the confirmation arrives by telegram. Around you, officers react with a mixture of relief and despair. No one cheers. There is nothing to celebrate in this ending. The terms? Someone asks. The signals officer reads from the telegram, Germany to evacuate all occupied territories within 15 days, Allied occupation of the Rhineland, surrender of the High Seas Fleet, reparations to be determined at a future peace conference, maintenance of the blockade until a formal peace treaty is signed. The blockade continues? Another officer asks, dismay evident in his voice. But our people are starving. The Allies know that, you say quietly. It ensures we'll accept whatever terms they offer at the peace conference. The room falls silent as the implications sink in. Germany is not just defeated, it's at the mercy of its enemies. At 11 a.m. you step outside the headquarters building. The rain has stopped and weak November sunshine filters through broken clouds. In the distance you can hear the guns, the last shots of the Great War, and then at precisely 11 they fall silent. The silence is eerie after 4 years of constant warfare. It feels wrong somehow, as if the world has stopped turning. Men stand motionless in the street, listening to the absence of sound. Major Schmidt appears at your side. It's over, he says simply. The fighting is over, you correct him. But the consequences, those are just beginning. Later that day, you receive your new orders. You're to return to Berlin to assist the provisional government in demobilizing the army. Millions of men will be coming home, hungry, traumatized, many wounded, all defeated, to a country in the throes of revolution and economic collapse. As you pack your few belongings, you reflect on the war and its end. Germany gambled and lost. The Schlieffen Plan, unrestricted submarine warfare, the Brest-Litovsk Treaty with Russia, the Spring Offensive, each a desperate throw of the dice that might have changed the outcome. But the dice came up wrong every time. And underneath those specific failures lay deeper problems. A blockaded nation that couldn't feed itself, an army that was tactically brilliant but strategically blind, a military leadership that seized control of the state but had no idea how to run it, a war economy that slowly collapsed under the weight of 4 years of total war. In the end, Germany lost the First World War not because its army was defeated in some climactic battle, but because the entire nation, from the frontline soldiers to the factory workers to the farmers to the generals, simply couldn't sustain the effort any longer. The Great War was a test of endurance, a grinding, merciless contest to see which side would break first. And Germany, for all its military prowess, broke first. On your last night at headquarters, you walk the empty corridors, now stripped of maps and equipment. The staff has mostly departed, heading back to a Germany that bears little resemblance to the confident empire that marched to war in 1914. In what was once the main operations room, you find a single map still pinned to the wall, a map of Europe showing the front lines at the time of the armistice. The German army remains on foreign soil in the west, having never suffered a decisive battlefield defeat. In the east, it occupies vast territories taken from the defunct Russian Empire. To an uninformed observer, it might look like Germany was winning, or at least holding its own. But you know better. The army might still be in the field, but the nation behind it had collapsed, economically, politically, morally. And that, you reflect, is the final lesson of the Great War. Modern industrial warfare isn't just a contest of armies, but of entire societies. Germany's army was never decisively beaten in the field, but Germany itself was beaten by hunger, by revolution, by the slow, grinding pressure of a war it couldn't sustain. You leave headquarters early the next morning, boarding a staff car for the journey back to Berlin. The roads are clogged with troops heading in the same direction, the beginning of the great demobilization that will return millions of soldiers to a homeland they barely recognize. Unlike your comfortable bed right now, the car's seat is hard and the journey long, but as you watch the Belgian countryside slide past, you feel a strange sense of relief. The killing has stopped, the great gamble is over, Germany has lost, but at least it can now begin the long, difficult process of rebuilding. What no one yet realizes, not you, not Hindenburg, not the Allied leaders dictating peace terms, is that the seeds of an even greater conflict are being sown in this moment of German defeat. The harsh terms of the armistice, the continuing blockade, the stab in the back myth already taking root, all will contribute to the rise of a far more dangerous Germany just 2 decades later. But that's a story for another time. For now, as November 1918 draws to a close, Germany faces the bitter fruits of defeat, revolution, hunger, occupation, and the long shadow of failure that will haunt the nation for generations to come. The Great War is over, the guns have fallen silent, the gambles have failed, and Germany, proud Imperial Germany, has lost. Your eyes grow heavy as the car bumps along roads crowded with returning soldiers. Unlike your warm, comfortable bed where you're listening to this story now, sleep won't come easily in this uncomfortable position, but you've learned to grab rest where you can in 4 years of war. As you drift toward unconsciousness, one thought follows you into your dreams. The war to end all wars